Hi, everyone. Today we'll begin our second book of the semester, looking at Gary Allen Fine's Kitchens. So we can keep in mind that we're still continuing to look at the contemporary American thoughts. So here we're looking at those past ideas during the middle years that are being kind of elaborated on and updated to fit our current lives today. So overall, we can say that there's a building on those threads with D'Amelio. We saw the building with Cooley and Mead, Sasson, the building with Du Bois, and they both kind of incorporate a little bit of capitalism, Marxist ideas within the frameworks. For Gary Allen Fine, we're going to be kind of taking out the Marxism element, but in a sense combining the kind of individual level we see with Cooley and Mead, but also the more group community oriented focus we see with Du Bois. And so I like to say that he combines the symbolic interactionism we see with the community sociology we see. And overall, taking those two together, we can say that we're looking at a kind of social psychology of social organization. So basically, how is order created? So he looks at restaurants specifically, but we can talk about how this applies to other organizations as well, such as education, such as sports. So yes, he focuses on restaurants and kitchens, but yes, we can also apply it to other organizations. How the organizations establish order, how that order contributes to the overall functioning of the organization. So we see a little bit of a connection to Durkheim with the focus on culture, how culture is very important, but also see a little bit of focus on Goffman, how the individual kind of negotiates and interacts with culture as a whole. So just a little bit of background into the book. Today, what we start to see is that restaurants have a very strong presence in popular culture. So, in other words, today, the social recognition and status given to restaurants, people who work in restaurants, is much higher compared to the past. Now, there's always been kind of a higher end culture that really gives restaurant status, that would really give chefs high status. But now this kind of high end culture attribute has been kind of generalized to popular culture as a whole, and basically, technological advances such as the internet, such as smartphones, such as all these new applications, has really allowed kind of the popular culture to embrace restaurants and the food industry as a whole. And we can also kind of see the expansion of this food restaurant culture and television as well, cable television. You can flip around the channel, you can find different programs dedicated to food and the food culture. You can find entire channels dedicated to that mission as well. So basically, what you start to see is that today's popular culture really embraces restaurants and the food culture much more compared to 30, 40 years ago. And so we can say that there's two sides to this coin today, because it's so easy to put the food out there, to put your reviews out there. That can be bad because everybody's a critic these days. If you have a computer and you go visit a restaurant, automatically people think um, they're in a position to critique and judge. On the other hand, this can be good, but you can use that same media formats. You can use the same formats to get yourself out there, to not only get the food out there, but get kind of your name and your brand out there as well. So we can say that within kind of the restaurant itself, often, we go for the experience, we go for the company, we go for the food, but we really don't think about, all the different uh, things that go on to create that experience for us, that goes on to getting the food to the table, that goes on so people can have a good time. Because a lot of this work is invisible work, invisible in the sense that maybe it's kind of behind the kitchen where you can't see it. So it's out of sight, out of mind. invisible work in another sense that it's right in front of your face, but you just take it for granted. You don't really kind of think about it. So you don't think about it, it becomes kind of invisible to you. So this invisible kind of behind the scenes work is really what Fine's interested in. You know, what are these dynamics that ultimately all come together to create social order in restaurants? But again, we can apply this as well to other organizations. Typically, you take it for granted how an organization functions. And it's only when the organization is dysfunctional, then you start to think about what's going wrong. But typically, when it's functional, we never really question, what is going right here? And that's what Fine tries to get into. So overall, the research focus of the book is to look at four different restaurants. And although there are differences among the four, what Fine wants to do is focus more on the similarities and kind of bring the similarities all to the table to recognize how these social organizations establish functionality, how they create order as a whole. So with that kind of backdrop into the book, we can start to break it down in terms of the general type of theory and then kind of the what, how, and the why. So overall, we can say, generally speaking, we're looking at a theory of organization. So, if you really wanted to bring it down to the micro level, I would say you could look at it as a theory of the social psychology of organization, like I mentioned before. But because he kind of keeps it more at that community level, he looks at not individuals as individuals, but individuals as part of a collective. I think a better label for this is a theory of social organization. So he's trying to explain the creation of social order in restaurants, basically looking at this interplay between what's going on the personal level, how we are kind of recognizing situations, how we think about situations, and how we act in those situations, and how that's all in relationship to the social worlds. So whether it be a customer, whether it be co-workers, whether it be the economy or the media as a whole, how people are kind of interacting with the social structures around them and how together the personal and social come together to create that functionality, the order as a whole in the restaurants. So again, you think about other applications of this theory, not only in the restaurants but in other places as well. I'll be talking about some examples of that as we go through this. But to me, it's just kind of interesting to look at this social order theory, theory of organization, and be able to apply it to a restaurant, but still apply it to other organizations as well. So the beginning of the book, he kind of touches on two different things, kind of getting in and then getting through. Getting in is basically how often you become part of the restaurant industry, specifically kind of looking at cooks. But also you could apply this to other individuals as well who work in the restaurant industry. And then also kind of just getting through the day. So again, things that we typically don't think about unless you're in the situation. But as that customer, it's this invisible work that really goes on out of sight, out of mind, or goes on right in front of our face, but we take it for granted. Thus, we don't think about it. So getting in, there's basically, we can say, two different paths people take. One formal path and one informal path that kind of leads people into the restaurant industry. Again, we can concentrate on cooks here, but this can go for other workers as well. Formerly, you're seeking out the education. So you want to learn from somebody, whether it be a parent, whether it be a friend, attending a formal cooking school. And through that formal education, you're kind of learning the game, and then you kind of take that formal education and you can take it into the restaurant industry. On the other hand, what you start to see is that working at a restaurant may kind of lead up to becoming a cook. So you're doing one job one day, but something happens and they need you kind of in the backspace of the kitchen where the cooking is going on. So although maybe started out the day as a server or as a runner, but you actually finished the day as a cook, and you kind of continue that little by little, and then eventually become a cook and leave in your old position. And other ways you see this going on, and it's kind of by chance. They tell a story in the book where somebody was looking for a cook, uh, somebody was, looking for somebody to help them out, and this person, didn't work at a restaurant. So it's not like you were there serving and somebody needed help and you became a cook. But here you ended up by chance, because somebody is looking for somebody, and it's by chance, you're in the room, or somebody brought your name up, and eventually you end up in the kitchen as a cook. So those are more informal paths. But today you start to see more emphasis on the formal path. And that's because the growing popularity of restaurants, of the food culture, basically makes it more competitive. When it carries more status, when it carries more popularity compared to the past, more people want to do it. And when more people want to do it, you have to find ways to distinguish one person from another person. So typically today, you kind of do that through the formal qualifications you have. You go and you get educated for a year or two or whatever, and you use those credentials to set yourself apart from other people. A lot of still informal workings going on, but today more than ever, it's important to kind of have those credentials in addition to have those kind of informal networking things going on to help you along the way. So that's how a lot of people actually get in the industry. And then we can look at basically, on a day-to-day basis, what's going on to get through the day. And again, we'll look at kind of the personal and the social kind of working together. And when there's no conflict, when there's no dysfunction, then order is created. But when there's conflict, when there's dysfunction, that's when the disorder can emerge. So, we'll get into these items in more depth as we move forward in the book. But we can look at how, time represents kind of a social force, a social structure that you have to manage wisely to succeed. So, in other words, um, you want your servers to be happy. So you want to get the food to the servers as quickly as you can. You want the customer to be happy. So you want to make sure you pay attention to what you're doing in the kitchen. So the food is not only efficient, but it's of high quality as well. So, you're trying to please your coworkers, you're trying to please the customers, and often there's a watch on you. You don't have all the time in the world. So you need to find ways to save time. So to manage obstacle time, you strategize to find ways to save time. And there's, many different strategies to minimize waits. You prepare ahead of time. You, sometimes you'll not necessarily cook it all, but start to cook something and finish cooking it later. If you know you're going to have a busy time of the day, you really prep for what's going on then. And as a chef, sometimes you compromise. You may not be happy with the dish, but you recognize it's good enough and I need to get it out there as soon as possible rather than restarting, which would take more time. So again, the personal, what are different ways I can save time to make sure everything's going on smoothly? So social order is created, and the social, the time itself that sometimes forces your hand and you have to do things that perhaps you didn't want to do. So another social force we could look at ties into space. So basically, you have to manage these spaces, and one way of managing space is to keep its appearance. And to keep up its appearance, you want to have the customer think that's a clean, kind of safe space. And so often, you don't have all the time in the world to clean. So what you do is you try to strategize what you keep clean and what you keep dirty. And basically, you want to keep everything clean. That's in the eye of the customer. In other words, if it's visible to the customer, you want to concentrate on that. If the customers can't see it, on the other hand, then perhaps you can let it get a little bit dirty and wait till the end of the day or perhaps the next morning to clean it. So again, if you try to clean everything at once, then you want to be able to do that. And then the kind of dirtiness starts to be visible to the customer, and that will turn them off. But when you kind of focus on is keeping the front clean and the back, you can take care of whenever you have extra time to take care of it. And then the customer is going to be happy. And then, everything is going to be smooth in terms of functionality. So finally, people, as a social structure, you basically have to find ways to establish and maintain coworker harmony. So if people are upset with one another, coworker wise, people are not getting along, then overall that's going to cause that tension. It's going to cause that dysfunction that can contribute to the disorder as a whole. So to avoid that, you need to find different strategies to create cohesiveness, to create a bond among workers. And when you have that cohesion, when you have that bond, yes, you may encounter some difficulties with your coworkers, but you deal with it, you get around it, and you move on. So you don't let the difficulties take over the business. You manage your difficulties so the business can run smoothly. So again, just a little bit of a taste of those dynamics between the personal level, kind of what we're doing, and the social level, what we're responding to create that overall social order within the restaurant. So before we end the class for today, what I want to do is just simply touch on the book report too. So the second book report is basically the same in terms of what you're going to be doing. The guidelines are the same, but what's going to be different is the theory you're writing about. So here we're taking it down a little bit more to a micro level, although Veblen did that as well. But nevertheless, we can say that looking at the action in the framework, the action that we're really focusing on is the creation of order in restaurants. So compared to Veblen, we looked at the creation of social stratification among classes. Here we're looking at the creation of order in restaurants. And then, the construction of reality we'll talk about, and we'll see a little bit about the American theme about trying to avoid tension, uh, both on a social and a psychological level. You're trying to avoid the tension, the problems that could emerge, and the different elements of agency and structure that come into play. Again, we'll look at kind of culture as an important social structure and how that ties into people perhaps having each other's backs, compromising with issues. And then we'll look at that kind of directional focus, top down or bottom up. Like Veblen, we'll see a little bit of both, how the top down structures kind of force our hands, but also how we play our cards in our own ways when we encounter these structural uh, forces on that macro level. So I'll leave that there for today. We'll come back and talk about the guidelines much more as we move through the book. But there's a little bit of background into the book, a little bit of introduction in terms of the type of theory, what he's trying to explain, and ultimately how he explains it.